we're going to start by crossing to the Isle of Arran. And we're going to be handing over to our correspondent, Nick Hyam, who's there. Nick, over to you.
Yes, indeed, Hugh. You find us out on the waters of beautiful Lamlash Bay on Arran, dominated by the bulk of Holy Island. Now, this bay, like the whole of the Firth of Clyde, used to be absolutely full of fish, but the fish have vanished. And Lamlash Bay is the centre of an experimental scheme to try and bring the fish back. Why Lamlash Bay? Well, there's something rather special about it, as I've been finding out. Beneath the waters of Lamlash Bay lies a precious natural resource. Not fish, but marl. Beautiful, fragile, increasingly rare, and a wonderful nursery for shellfish and a host of other species. But much of the marl has been destroyed by commercial fishing, and the fish stocks have vanished with it. The answer, say local campaigners, is simple. Stop fishing.
This is lovely stuff. Yeah. We feel it's important to have a complete no-take zone, to let the whole seabed completely naturally regenerate. And natural regeneration of the seabed, we feel, and scientifically I think it's proven that that's the best way forward for local communities like Arran, and especially for the fishing industry.
The biggest problem is dredging for scallops, which campaigners say destroys everything on the seabed, including the marl. Scallops are a delicacy which fetch high prices. The local Clyde fishermen aren't happy with a total ban on fishing, even in a limited area, but the two sides are working towards a compromise. Lamlash Bay used to be one of the richest fishing grounds in the Clyde. Not anymore. The fish have gone. Now there's a chance they may return, along with the marl. Well, with me is Don McNeish, who's been campaigning for a no-take zone here for many years from a conservation point of view. Don, the fishermen often get a rather bad press in situations like that, but actually their interests and yours are virtually identical, aren't they?
They're exactly the same. And now we're working with the fishermen on this project. It has a real chance of success.
Why has it taken you so long to discover that you have something in common?
Just different points of view and building trust. That takes time. I think we have that trust now, and I think we can move forward.
Okay, also here is Dave Donnan from Scottish Natural Heritage. Dave, will this no-take zone actually replenish the fish stocks here in Lamlash Bay and indeed in the wider Clyde?
Well, the important thing about Lamlash Bay is the marl beds that we have here. Marl is a nursery habitat for scallops in particular, but also for juvenile fish like cod. So there's a good chance that protecting the marl in the bay will be good for the biodiversity, the wildlife of the bay, and also good for the fishery by providing for the nursery ground for the juvenile scallops in particular.
Okay, Dave and Don, thank you very much indeed. So this could be a win-win situation for fishermen and environmentalists, but to give you an idea of how bad the situation, in the 1980s they held a weekend sea angling festival here every year. They used to take £16,000 of fish out of Lamlash Bay. 1994, the last year of the festival, they took just £200. So there's a long way to go to restore the fish stocks. But back to you in the studio here.
Nick, thank you very much. Beautiful images there. Our spring watch has started. Nick Hyam there on the Isle of Arran.
We're here in beautiful Lamlash Bay all day on News 24, so do stay with us. We're starting here in Arran. To give you some idea of where we are, Arran sits in the Clyde estuary where there used to be loads and loads of fish, but fish stocks have been diminishing seriously in recent years. Lamlash Bay on Arran, where I'm standing, is on the island's east coast. Now, what's being proposed here is a no-take zone for fishing in the northern part of Lamlash Bay, and in the rest of the bay, a marine protected zone which would have only limited fishing. And the idea is that the bay could be used to regenerate at least some of the fish stocks which have been disappearing from the whole of the west coast of Scotland, so that everybody, conservationists and fishermen, could win. Now, there used to be a lot of fish here. Back in the 1970s and 80s, they had held an annual sea angling festival in Lamlash Bay. Over the course of a weekend, they used to take about £16,000 of fish. Well, the last festival was in 1994. They took less than £200 of fish. That's some evidence of how badly fish stocks here have been affected. Now, where have the fish gone? What can we do about it? I'm joined by Patrick Stewart of the Clyde Fishermen's Association, Don McNeish, a local campaigner. Patrick, I talk with you first. There's a suggestion that this is a result of commercial overfishing. Are we wrong to demonise the local fishermen here?
Yes, you are. I think there's been so much publicity about the effects of the common fisheries policy that you know that the troublemakers aren't here but across the channel.
If we were to close off part at least of Lamlash Bay to fishing, what do you think that would do to fish stocks?
Well, we've seen, as you've said quite rightly, a collapse of whitefish stocks. The reason is not to be found in the Clyde, but we have left two very vibrant fisheries, one for langoustines, as they call them down south, and the other for scallops. Now, we want to do what we want to do, and what we've been trying to do for years is to protect those fisheries against the mistakes that were made with other fisheries.
And would closing off Lamlash Bay to scallop fishing in particular make a difference?
It would make a difference if it's for a purpose. And the purpose is, and I think this is accepted by the campaigners here, to see how regeneration can bring back the scallop stocks to full vitality in the Clyde.
Don McNeish, I turn to you. You're chairman of the Community of Arran Seabred Trust. You've been campaigning for this no-take zone as well. What difference do you think it would make?
I think that it could make a difference to the scallop enhancement scheme that's being put forward, and also it would be a benchmark for any management that was put forward. Allowing it to revert to its natural state would give an indication of what would happen if nothing was done to the area.
Now, you and the fishermen have all been talking about this for years, but nothing seems to have been done. Why is it taking so long to get this problem sorted?
I think that we and the fishermen are now moving together to bring the project forward. We're both understanding just exactly what we're saying to each other now, and we're working together to try and bring this whole project forward. OK,
Don McNeish, Patrick Stewart, thank you both very much. An example there of conservationists and fishermen after some years finding common cause. Well, I'm joined out here by Patrick Stewart of the Clyde Fishermen's Association and Don McNeish, who's a local environmental campaigner. Patrick, there's always a danger on these occasions that the fishermen get blamed. They're the villains of the piece. But you're as keen on a no fishing zone in the north of the bay as anyone, aren't you?
That's right. I mean, you've remarked about the demersal, the whitefish disappearing. That's true. But we want to do what we can to preserve the stocks of shellfish and enhance them. And a no-take zone allied to a marine protected area can do that, we hope.
Is there any way of bringing back then stocks of those whitefish, things like cod and so on, place?
Well, on a European basis, stringent efforts are being made. Cod is king in Brussels, and the fishermen are having to contribute very decisively to measures designed to do that. It's too early to say whether it will be effective, but we hope so. But global warming is another factor which even Brussels can do little about.
Don McNeish, you chair COAST, the Community of Arran Seabed Trust. You've been arguing for a no-take zone for a long time as well. It seems to have taken a long time, though, for you and the fishermen to realise that actually you share similar interests.
Absolutely.
Why has it taken so long?
But no, it's about building trust, and trust takes time. And it's only by dialogue with people and talking about our common aims that we've managed to build up enough trust to move this new project forward together.
Now, you're keen to preserve the stocks of scallops and also the male beds, but what do you think a no-take zone in this bay would do for other fish stocks in the area as well?
We don't know, basically, but we do hope that it will help scallops, and we hope that it will have a knock-on effect with the other fish.
Because I talked about the statistics, the Sea Angling Festival and so on. The drop-off, the fall-off in the number of fish has been absolutely catastrophic, hasn't it?
Absolutely. That's just been indicative of what's been happening right up and down the west coast. Things have changed, and we have to try and make stratagems for the future, and that's really what this whole project's about. It's about the future and making things sustainable, hopefully, in the future.
Patrick, is it really possible to go on commercial fishing for scallops and for other things as well and see stocks recover? Surely there's a problem. You simply can't do both.
No, I think you're wrong there. The major fishery in the Clyde is for what you call in the south langoustine. Those stocks are expanding exponentially at the moment in these very waters. So it is happening. It's not all doom and gloom. We're as interested as anyone in having sustainable fisheries in clean and healthy seas.
What would you like to see then in other parts of the Clyde? I mean, this is just one tiny bay. Would you like to see this sort of experiment replicated in other parts of the Clyde estuary and other parts of the west coast?
Well, there's no point in replicating experiments. You only need one laboratory to carry out the test. But the lessons we learn from that may have some value elsewhere. But there are already several closed areas in the Clyde, so we are contributing already to this regeneration.
Don McNeish, you would argue, wouldn't you, that experiments elsewhere in the world, particularly in New Zealand, have shown that no-take zones do work?
Absolutely, and also in the Isle of Man, there have been trials that have been quite conclusive that they do work. So what we'd like to do is see them work in Scotland so that everybody can see the facts and figures for themselves.
Okay, Don McNeish, Patrick Stewart, fishermen and conservationists finding common ground, and there is one no-take fishing zone in the UK already. That's off Lundy Island in the Bristol Channel. That has, people say, really done wonders for the fish stocks around there. But from beautiful Lamlash Bay in Arran, back to you in the studio. Lamlash Bay used to be one of the richest fishing grounds in the Clyde. Not anymore. The fish have gone. Now there's a chance they may return. Well, you join me out here on the bay with Patrick Stewart of the Clyde Fishermen's Association and David Donnan of Scottish Natural Heritage. Patrick, there's a danger, isn't there, on these occasions that the fishermen get demonised, but you're as much in favour, really, of a no-take zone as anybody else.
It was our proposal to combine the Arran project with a scallop regeneration area, and I think we're getting there.
And do you think it will work? Will you actually bring the scallops back and indeed any other fish?
Well, they're not away, but I think we should assure a long-term future. It's worked elsewhere, and there's no reason it shouldn't work here.
David Donnan, Scottish Natural Heritage. People have been talking about this no-take zone idea for years, but it seems to have taken an awful long time to come about. Why?
I think it's one of these things. We've been talking about this for a long time. We've maybe not understood one another's point of view as much as we would like. We've been talking more in the past, getting together, making sure that we've got shared objectives for the proposal, and now we're looking at a win-win situation. Good for the conservation of biodiversity and good for the sustainability of the fishery.
Now, it's going to sustain the scallop fishery. The scallops will breed on the Mel, but is it going to do anything, do you think, for other sorts of fish in the Clyde?
Well, Merle is also a nursery habitat for cod, so it will be useful for the cod in the area, but if we were wanting to do something for cod, you need to be looking at a much bigger area than this. So perhaps in the future, a network of sites like this would be beneficial for whitefish, but it's scallops that's the focus of this particular project.
Patrick Stewart, would you be in favour of a network of sites like this to try and regenerate species like cod?
We have proposed and enforce, if you like, a temporal closure in the mouth of the Firth of Clyde every year for 6 or more weeks, precisely for the regeneration of cod, for protecting spawning stocks. So you don't need to ask that question. We do it already.
Do you think, though, that we'll ever get back to the position we were in 30, 40 years ago in which the Clyde estuary in this bay were absolutely swarming with fish?
No, there are factors beyond the control of man. Global warming is one particular thing. The type of plankton are changing. I think it's highly unlikely that the bonanza that was here in previous years will be back. But let's see what we can do.
OK, Patrick Stewart and David Donnan, thank you very much indeed. And if they do establish a no-take zone for fishing here off Arran, it'll be only the second in the British Isles. There's one already off Lundy Island in the Bristol Channel.
Talk to our correspondent, Nick Hyam. Nick.
Yes, Emily, welcome to breezy but beautiful Lamlash Bay on Arran, Holy Island there out in the bay behind us. Give you some idea of where we are. The Isle of Arran sits in the Clyde estuary, which is an area where fish stocks have dwindled dramatically in the past 30 years, and Lamlash Bay here is on the eastern side of the island. Now, there's a proposal to create a no-take zone for fishing in the northern part of Lamlash Bay over there, and to make the rest of Lamlash Bay a marine protected area where fishing would be strictly limited. The reason, to try and regenerate fish stocks. The hope is that more fish would breed in the bay, some of them might spread out into the rest of the Firth of Clyde, and everybody, conservationists and environmentalists, would benefit. And here is a little bit of the Mel, which we fished out of the bay yesterday. It's brittle, rather delicate and attractive stuff. Now, I'm joined by Patrick Stewart of the Clyde Fishermen's Association and by David Donnan of Scottish Natural Heritage. Patrick, there's a danger in situations like this that the fishermen get cast as the villains, but actually it's as much in your interests to have conservation so on as it is anybody else's, isn't it?
I mean, certainly, and that's why we did suggest the scallop regeneration scheme, which I'm glad to see everyone now thinks is a wonderful idea.
But that is in effect a no-take zone.
It will require part of the area to be a no-take zone. That's absolutely right.
It'll regenerate the scallops. Will it do anything else, do you think, for other sorts of fish in the Clyde?
I think unfortunately not. There are very major measures being taken for cod recovery, over much greater areas in the Clyde than here in Lamlash Bay. They are showing some signs of recovery, but I don't think this project will help that enormously.
David Donnan, if I can turn to you, what's your view on whether this project can do anything for wider fish stocks, not just the scallops here in Lamlash Bay?
Well, the important thing about Merle is it's a nursery habitat for different species. That includes the scallops in particular, which is the focus of the work we're doing here. But also it is a nursery ground for juvenile cod as well. Having said that, this is, as Patrick said, a relatively small area. And so there might be some localised effects here, but it would be we would require larger areas, as Patrick was speaking about, to get the benefits for cod.
The fishermen and the conservationists have been talking about a no-take zone for years and still haven't established one. Given that their interests are apparently very similar, why has it taken so long?
Well, I think there's probably a number of things contributing to that. It's been difficult to get a shared view of what the objectives are over the no-take zone. It's an issue that's polarised opinions over the years, but now that we have identified those shared objectives, and that's involved working together and talking, that's the important thing about this, and we've moved forward in the last wee while as a result.
Patrick, are you surprised that it took you and the conservationists so long to realise actually that your interests are the same?
Well, I am surprised, but I think it's a general problem in society that confrontation happens more. People expect confrontation more than they expect agreement, and I think it took us by surprise that we were actually agreeing, and now we're moving forward together, and with the real important help of SNH, because without SNH we couldn't get this project to go. We'll get there.
Now, there used to be a wonderful fishery in the Clyde, inshore fishery, enormous amounts of fish taken. It's dwindled dramatically. Do you think it can really be recovered at all?
Well, obviously one's hope is that it can, but realistically it won't be to its former glory, which is a pity because the demand from London and the home counties for the top quality product here is enormous and growing, and I wish we could fulfil it all.
OK, Patrick Stewart and David Donnan, thank you very much indeed. Yes, good morning, Jonathan. Welcome to Arran. Absolutely beautiful morning. This is a place that used to be famous for its fishing, but not anymore. To give you some idea of where we are, Arran sits in the Clyde estuary, where fish stocks have been devastated in recent decades, largely thanks to overfishing, and Lamlash Bay is on Arran's east side. Now, locals have been campaigning for years for a no-take zone for fishing in the northern part of Lamlash Bay behind me, where all fishing would be banned, and in the rest of the bay they want to set up a marine protected zone with strictly limited fishing. The idea is that it would allow fish stocks in the bay to regenerate and then spill over into the surrounding seas so that everybody, conservationists and fishermen, would benefit. Just to give you some idea of how devastated the fish stocks are around here, they used to hold a sea angling festival one weekend every year in Lamlash Bay. In the 70s and 80s, they caught around 16,000 pounds of fish. The last festival, 1994, they caught less than 200 pounds. The fish simply vanished. Well, I'm joined now by Don McNeish, who's the chairman of a local campaigning organisation, the Community of Arran Seabed Trust, and by David Donnan from Scottish Natural Heritage. Don, I say this is special because the Mail is here. Did you always know there was Mail here?
No, we didn't. It was only when we started really investigating as divers just exactly what was in the bay that we discovered Merle. We'd swum over it for years and not known what it was.
And you were prompted to look by plans to build a sewage outfall in the bay?
That's one of the things that came up. When we had identified the area, the new sewage outfall was going to go into it, and it would have severely damaged the Merle.
Dave, let me ask you, we're talking about establishing what is in effect a no-take zone for fishing. What would that do over the next 5 or 10 years to fish stocks?
I think the benefit here is very definitely for scallops. Merle is a nursery habitat for scallops, and so by protecting the area we're getting two benefits: one for the biodiversity of the bay, and secondly for the sustainability of the fishery.
What about other fish besides scallops, though? Because it looks a tiny area. Can it really help to restock the whole of the Clyde?
Well, again, there's research that shows that Merle is a nursery habitat for things like juvenile cod. This area is perhaps a little bit small for getting those kind of benefits. We'd be looking at a network of sites throughout Scotland to bring the benefits for fish, but for scallops, which basically stay in the same place, then this is something which would be very beneficial.
Don, you've been campaigning for this no-take zone for years, and I suppose the people you've had to convince most are the fishermen. How difficult has that been?
It has been difficult, but we're now working with the fishermen on a joint project, and we hope that they will see the benefits that accrue from this project.
So do you think we'll ever get back to the stage of the 70s and 80s where you can have a sea angling festival and 16,000 pounds of fish out of Lamlash Bay?
I don't think we will, but I think that it's possible that future generations may get to that stage if it's properly managed.
This is Lamlash Bay on the Isle of Arran in the Clyde estuary, and it used to be full of fish. Back in the 1970s and 80s, they held an annual sea angling festival here, and over the course of a weekend, they pulled out around 16,000 pounds of fish. The last festival was held in 1994, and they pulled out less than 200 pounds. The fish had vanished, not just from this bay, but from much of the Clyde. Now, Lamlash is at the centre of a scheme to try and bring the fish stocks back. They want to establish what they're calling a no-take zone for fishing across the northern end of the bay, between Holy Island and Arran itself, and they want to control fishing tightly in the rest of the bay. There used to be great fishing in the Clyde for herring and mackerel, cod and haddock, but not anymore. Many fishermen have simply given up.
There are hardly any boats left. Boats has just been dwindled away, decommissioning schemes, you name it, bankruptcies when things go bad. It's not as if it's just roses all the time. We've got a lot of bills to pay, a livelihood to look after.
Only two species are still caught in the Clyde, prawns and scallops, a high-priced delicacy. But most of those are harvested by scallop dredgers, which conservationists say destroy everything on the seabed, including marl. The fishermen say the shortage of fish isn't down to scallop dredging, but to a shortage of plankton for the fish to feed on. So how do they feel about being blamed for the lack of fish?
The scallop fishermen in the Firth of Clyde have been making a living here for about 50, 60 years, and they're still making a living. So I don't see why they should be demonised. They look after areas, certain areas, like Lamlash Bay here. They only ever fish here when the weather's really bad. And it's not as if they're fishing 365 days of the year. We have a weekend ban in the Firth of Clyde, which we wanted. And we generally do try to look after the scallop fishery.
What difference do you think having a no-take zone up in the northern part of the bay here might?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. It's an experiment. Hopefully it will do some good. We're quite confident it'll probably, if we get to regenerate the scallops, it might make a difference to scallops.
Because of course the campaigners, the local campaigners here who want a no-take zone say, well, other parts of the world, New Zealand for instance, have shown that if you establish a no-take zone, all sorts of species benefit and the diversity of the fish comes back. You're not convinced by that?
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully that's the case. But in these other parts of the world, there's maybe quite a lot of plankton to feed the fish. And I mean, when both Alan and I in earlier years, when we fished for whitefish in the Firth of Clyde, and when we're out with sounders and all the equipment, we could see plankton every day when we were catching whitefish. And there's been very, very big collapse in the plankton in the Firth of Clyde and in the west of Scotland in different areas. And until we see the plankton, we're not going to see big increases in the whitefish. Hopefully it'll come back gradually, and we'll just have to wait and see.
For once, fishermen and conservationists are agreed, and if a no-take zone is established, the fish may one day return to Lamlash Bay.